Hey there, welcome to our deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about Buddhism, getting down to some of its core ideas. Whether you've heard a lot about it or are just starting to explore, we're here to make it clear and interesting and not too overwhelming, like giving you a map to navigate what it was all about right from the beginning.
Right, and we're focusing on this really cool ancient Buddhist text called the Brahmajāla Sutta, which is often called the all-embracing net of views. But here's the thing. It's not like a typical religious text that just lays down a strict set of rules or beliefs. It's more like a snapshot of all the different spiritual ideas that were around during the time of the Buddha.
So it's like a survey of the intellectual scene back then. I like that. That gives us a really interesting way to understand where Buddhism came from and how the Buddha himself thought about things.
Totally. So instead of just giving you a summary of Buddhist doctrines as they are today, we're going to kind of time travel back and see how the Buddha dealt with all the different viewpoints and practices of his time.
I feel like we're getting a backstage pass to ancient India. Okay, so paint the scene for us.
All right, so imagine this. The Buddha is traveling with a huge group of his monks, like 500 of them, and they're going from one city to another.
Wow, 500. That's quite the entourage.
It was. And get this, they're being followed by this wandering teacher named Supiya and his student, Brahmadatta.
Okay, so two more travelers on the road. What's so special about them?
Well, Supiya is constantly bad-mouthing the Buddha, his teachings, which are called the Dhamma, and the community of monks known as the Sangha.
He sounds like a real critic. But what about his student? What's Brahmadatta doing while all this is going on?
The total opposite. Brahmadatta can't stop singing the praises of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Talk about a contradiction.
Oh, that's fascinating. You've got the teacher criticizing and the student praising. Must have made for some interesting dinner conversations.
Right. And, this whole dynamic actually teaches us something really important about Buddhism right off the bat. When the Buddha's monks start gossiping about this weird Supiya and Brahmadatta situation, the Buddha overhears them. He sits down with them and says, hey, listen, getting all upset and worked up about criticism, whether it's about me, the Dhamma, or the Sangha, is just not the way to go.
Okay, so don't sweat the haters.
Yeah.
But why not? Why did the Buddha say that?
He pointed out that anger and agitation, especially when someone's criticizing you, basically cloud your judgment. It makes you unable to see things clearly and figure out if there's any truth to what's being said or if it's just totally off base.
Right. It's like when you get all emotional, you can't think straight. So it's about keeping a level head.
Exactly. And he actually applied the same logic to praise, too. He told his monks that getting overly excited about praise and compliments can also be a problem.
Interesting. So even good vibes can be a distraction.
Yeah, because if you get swept up in the good feelings, you might miss whether the praise is even deserved or true. It's like you're so busy feeling good about yourself that you don't actually look at the situation honestly.
So the main point here is to stay grounded, whether you're facing criticism or praise. See things clearly without letting your emotions color them.
Absolutely. That's a foundational idea in Buddhism. And, it's super relevant even today, right? I mean, we're bombarded with opinions and judgments all the time.
Totally. It's like everyone's a critic these days, so cultivating that objective mindset is pretty key. Okay, so where does this sutta go from there?
The Sutta then goes on to a section called the Analysis of Virtue, which is split into a short section on virtue and an intermediate section on virtue.
Analysis of virtue. Sounds like we're getting into the ethics of Buddhism.
Precisely. These sections lay out the basic conduct expected of the Buddha's followers, like what kind of actions they were supposed to avoid.
So it's about how to live a good life, a life that leads to spiritual growth.
You got it. In the short section, it starts with the big no-nos, like you can't harm living beings, steal, or engage in what they called unchaste living, which for the monks basically meant being celibate.
Okay, so nonviolence, honesty, and a commitment to their spiritual path. Pretty standard ethical guideline.
Right, but there's more. It also emphasizes being truthful and not lying.
Of course, honesty is important in any ethical system. What else?
Well, they also talk about avoiding what they call divisive speech, like spreading rumors and gossip to create conflict between people.
So not stirring up drama. Makes sense.
And they also say to avoid harsh speech. Instead, they emphasize communicating in a way that's kind and constructive.
Oh, I like that. It's not just what you say, but how you say it. Do they have anything to say about all that chit-chatting that goes on? The useless kind?
Actually, yeah. They also mention avoiding idle chatter, highlighting the importance of speaking purposefully. So it's about thinking before you speak, making sure that your words are meaningful and timely.
So mindfulness of speech.
Yeah.
not just blathering on about whatever pops into your head.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the power of words and how they impact both ourselves and others. And in the intermediate section on virtue, the sutta gets even more specific.
Oh, really? Like how?
Well, it talks about avoiding unsuitable shows and entertainment, like dancing, singing, instrumental music, and theater.
Oh, wow. So no Broadway for these guys. But
No.
why? What's the idea behind that?
The text actually lists some pretty wild examples like acrobatic performances and even animal fights, if you can believe it.
Yikes, animal fights.
Yeah.
It's definitely not something we'd consider entertainment today.
Mm.
But I can see how all these things would have been pretty popular back then.
Oh, yeah, totally. But the idea wasn't that having fun is bad. It was more about intentionally limiting sensory stimulation and external distractions.
So it's about creating the right inner environment for spiritual practice.
Exactly. It's like clearing away the clutter in your mind so you can focus on what's important. And it wasn't just about shows. They also avoided certain types of games, specifically those that could lead to negligence and a lack of mindfulness.
What kind of games?
They mention all sorts of ancient board games and dice games. They even mention games where people would mimic deformities.
That's interesting. So anything that scattered their attention and pulled them away from cultivating present moment awareness?
Precisely. And it also extended to material comforts. They had guidelines about avoiding fancy beds and seats, like they wouldn't use thrones decorated with animal carvings or sleep on luxurious, multicolored blankets.
So no fancy furniture for these folks. It's about simplicity.
Right. It's about minimizing attachment to material things and outward appearances.
Makes sense? What about the way they talk to each other? Did they have any guidelines for conversations?
You bet. They avoided what they call animal topics of conversation.
Animal topics. What does that even mean?
Well, it included things like talking about kings, battles, food, clothing, gossip, really anything considered trivial or unproductive for spiritual growth. Even philosophical discussions about the past and future were discouraged if they weren't aimed at genuine understanding and liberation.
Okay, so it's about staying focused on what really matters.
Yeah.
What about arguments? I mean, monks are people too. I'm sure they had disagreements.
Oh, they did. But there was a big emphasis on avoiding pointless arguments, those debates where the goal is just to win and prove you're right rather than to understand.
Ah, those can get pretty heated. Did they have any specific strategies for avoiding those kinds of clashes?
Yeah, actually, the Sutta lists some of the common debate tactics of the time. It's pretty funny, really. It shows how timeless those kinds of argumentative habits are.
Wow, so they were really paying attention to communication and how it can either help or hinder spiritual progress.
Exactly. They saw clear, kind, and meaningful communication as essential for inner peace and harmony. And finally, they had rules about avoiding wrong livelihood, especially what they called animal arts.
What did that include?
Things like palmistry, fortune-telling, astrology, dream interpretation, and certain types of divination and healing practices that were considered unethical for someone on a spiritual path.
So earning a living in a way that aligns with their values, not harming or exploiting others, makes sense?
Right, it was all about ethical conduct in every aspect of life.
Wow, so this analysis of virtue is a pretty comprehensive set of guidelines. It's really about creating a lifestyle that fosters mindfulness, inner peace, and ethical behavior.
It is. And you know, this ethical foundation sets the scene for the next major part of the Sutta, which is where we really start to see the Buddha's unique way of approaching different beliefs.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's next?
It's the exposition of the 62 views.
62 views. What do we talk about here?
This is where the Buddha lays out a huge range of different philosophical and spiritual beliefs that were popular in India at the time. It's like a giant survey of all the different answers people were coming up with to big questions like, what is reality? What happens after we die? And what's the nature of the self?
Oh, so this is the net of views, part of the Sutta's title. The Buddha's casting a wide net to capture all these different perspectives.
Exactly. But here's the crucial thing to remember. These 62 views are not the Buddha's own teachings. They're like a catalog of all the ideas that were floating around.
So it's more like he's saying, here's what everyone else is thinking, rather than here's what I believe.
Exactly. He's taking a step back and observing the whole intellectual landscape.
That's fascinating. Okay, so how are these 62 views organized?
The Sutta divides them into two main categories, theories of the past and theories of the future.
Okay, that makes sense. So theories about how things began and theories about what happens after death.
Precisely. And within these categories, there are a whole bunch of subcategories. Like one big category in the theories of the past is called eternalism.
Eternalism. I'm guessing that's the belief that everything has always existed.
You got it. It's the idea that both the self and the universe are eternal and unchanging. The Sutta lists 4 different reasons why people might hold this view.
What are those reasons?
Well, some people came to this belief through their own meditative experiences. They were able to remember past lives, sometimes going back huge stretches of time, like eons. And based on these experiences, they concluded that existence must be eternal.
Wow, so they had these intense, vivid memories and projected that sense of timelessness onto the whole universe.
Exactly. It's kind of like how our own personal experiences can shape our beliefs about the world. But it wasn't just about memories. The second reason for believing in eternalism was also based on recollections from deep meditation. But in this case, people recalled experiencing vast cosmic cycles of expansion and contraction, further reinforcing their belief in an eternal cosmos.
Okay, so experiencing those grand cosmic scales of time and space, I can see how that would be mind-blowing.
Totally. And the third reason for believing in eternalism was very similar to the second, just with slightly different details about the lengths of time they remembered. The point is that these were deep meditative experiences that led people to this belief.
So it's like those experiences felt so real and so vast that people took them as evidence for reality beyond time and change.
Right. And then the fourth reason was more about logic and reasoning. Some people arrived at the idea of eternalism just by thinking it through.
So they didn't have these profound meditative visions or anything like that. They just thought, well, logically, the universe must have always existed.
Yeah, it was more of an intellectual process. They looked at the world and used their reasoning to conclude that the self and the universe must be eternal and unchanging.
So you have both experiential and intellectual paths leading to the same belief.
Exactly. And then there's another category called partial eternalism.
Partial eternalism. So some things are eternal and some things aren't.
You got it. And the Sutta lists 4 different reasons for this belief, too.
Okay, let's hear them.
This one often came from people who remembered being gods in higher realms in their past lives.
Wow. So they're remembering being gods.
Yep. And some of them recalled being gods who became, let's say, corrupted by play.
Corrupted by play. Sounds kind of fun.
Well, it meant that they spent too much time indulging in pleasures and amusements and eventually got so distracted that they forgot their true nature.
Also, they fell from grace, so to speak.
Right, and they were reborn into lower realms. So they reasoned that while those higher divine states might be eternal, their own current existence was definitely not.
Interesting. So they believed in a kind of perfect, unchanging heaven, but also acknowledged the impermanence of their current situation.
Exactly. And another reason for partial eternalism came from gods who, let's say, got corrupted by mind.
What does that mean?
Well, they basically let negative emotions like envy and anger get the best of them, which led to their downfall.
Oh, so their own minds messed things up for them.
Yep. And they ended up being reborn into lower realms too. So again, they saw those higher states as eternal, while their own current state was impermanent.
So even gods aren't immune to messing up?
Nope, not at all. And then the last reason for believing in partial eternalism was based on a distinction between the body and the mind.
Okay, how does that work?
They saw the physical body as temporary and subject to change, getting old and all that, but they believed that the mind or consciousness was eternal and unchanging.
So it's like they were trying to reconcile the fact that everything in the world seems to change with the idea that something deep down inside us stays the same.
Precisely. And then there are views about whether the cosmos is finite or infinite.
So like, does the universe have an edge or does it go on forever?
Exactly. And the Sutta gives 4 reasons for these different views.
Okay, what are they?
Again, some people base their beliefs on meditative experiences. Some saw the cosmos as having a boundary. Others saw it as boundless.
So depending on their meditative state, their perception of the universe changed.
Right, and some perceived it as finite in some directions, but infinite in others.
That's pretty wild.
It is. And like with the other categories, the 4th reason for believing in a finite or infinite cosmos was based on logic and reasoning, where some thinkers might say, well, we just can't know for sure, so it's neither finite nor infinite.
So some left it as an open question. Okay, what other categories were there?
Oh, this next one is interesting. It's called endless equivocation.
Endless equivocation. That's a mouthful. What does it mean?
It basically describes those people who just couldn't bring themselves to take a firm stance on anything, especially when it came to questions of right and wrong or good and bad.
So they were always on the fence, never wanting to commit to a position.
Yep. And the Sutta gives 4 reasons for this.
Okay, I'm curious. Why would someone always avoid taking a stand?
One reason was a fear of being wrong. They knew they didn't have a perfect understanding of reality, so they were scared to say something that might turn out to be false.
So they'd rather say nothing than risk being wrong. What were the other reasons?
Well, another was a fear of getting attached. They worried that if they took a stand, they'd cling to that view and reject any opposing views, which would just cause them more suffering.
Ah, so they saw taking a strong stance as a potential trap. What else?
A third reason was a fear of being criticized by smarter people. They knew there were some sharp minds out there who could easily dismantle their arguments, and they wanted to avoid that kind of intellectual smackdown.
So they were playing it safe.
Exactly. And then the last reason was, well, let's just say not everyone is a brilliant philosopher. Some people were just, not sharp enough to come to a clear conclusion.
Ah, so sometimes uncertainty isn't a philosophical stance, it's just a lack of clarity.
Exactly. The Sutta gives the example of someone who, when asked if there's another world after death, couldn't say yes or no. They just didn't know.
That's a relatable kind of uncertainty.
Yeah.
Okay, so what other beliefs were floating around in ancient India?
Well, last but not least, we have fortuitous origination.
Fortuitous origination. That sounds pretty random. What's that all about?
It basically means that the self and the world came about by pure chance, without any cause.
Like everything just popped into existence for no reason?
Yep, that's the idea. And the Sutta gives two reasons for this belief.
Okay, what are they?
One reason came from the experience of suddenly becoming aware or conscious. Some people remembered a time when they weren't perceiving anything, and then bam, suddenly they were.
So it's like they woke up to existence without knowing what was there before.
Right. And they concluded from this that everything must have just begun spontaneously, without any prior cause. And the second reason was based, once again, on rational investigation.
So some thinkers just looked at the world and thought, yep, this all must have happened randomly.
Pretty much. Okay, so those are the main theories of the past covered in the Sutta.
Wow, that's a lot of different ideas about how things came to be.
Yeah.
But what about what happens after we die? What were people saying about that?
Right, so now we're getting into the theories of the future. And one of the biggest categories here is called the doctrines of percipient immortality.
Doctrines of percipient immortality. That sounds complex.
It is, but basically it covers all the different views about the self-surviving death with some form of conscious awareness.
Okay, so some kind of conscious afterlife. And how many different versions of this were there?
A whopping 16.
16.
Yeah, 16 different ways of imagining what a conscious afterlife might be like. They get pretty detailed about the characteristics of the surviving self.
Okay, break it down for me.
Well, they considered whether this surviving self was material or immaterial.
So does it have a physical form or not?
Exactly. They also debated whether it was finite or infinite, limited or unlimited, whether its perception was the same for everyone or different for each individual, and whether it experienced only happiness, only misery, or both.
So it's like a mix and match menu of afterlife options.
That's a great way to put it. And then there are the doctrines of non-percipient immortality, which offer 8 different views.
Non-percipient immortality. So this is about an afterlife without conscious awareness.
Right. It's like existing after death, but without any experience, like being in a deep sleep. And these are also based on whether the state was material or immaterial and finite or infinite.
Okay, so 8 different ways of imagining unconscious existence. What else?
Well, there are also 8 doctrines of neither percipient nor non-percipient immortality.
Neither percipient nor non-percipient. That sounds like a brain twister.
It is. It basically refers to a state after death that's beyond our usual categories of conscious or unconscious.
Okay, so something we can't even really wrap our heads around.
Pretty much. And then there's another big category called annihilationism.
Annihilationism. That sounds kind of intense. What does it mean?
It's the belief that when you die, that's it. Total annihilation. Nothing survives.
Okay, so no heaven, no hell, no reincarnation, just nothingness.
Right. And the Sutta lists 7 reasons why people might hold this view.
7 reasons for believing in nothingness. I'm surprised there are even that many.
Well, it really comes down to different understandings of what the self actually is. Some people identified the self with the physical body.
So when the body dies, the self dies.
Exactly. Others saw the self as a kind of divine being, or even as those formless states achieved in deep meditation. But the common thread is that all these things are seen as temporary and ending at death.
There's not so much a belief in nothingness, but a belief that everything we usually think of as self just ceases to exist.
Right. And then finally, we have the category of the self's unbinding in the here and now.
Unbinding in the here and now, what's that about?
This refers to the belief that liberation, which is called nibbana in Buddhism, is achievable in this very lifetime, not just after death.
So you don't have to wait for the afterlife to find true freedom.
Exactly. And the sutta links this idea to different levels of meditative absorption called jhana.
Jhana. Sounds familiar.
These are progressively deeper states of concentration, starting with refining and enjoying even sensual pleasures, and culminating in the fourth jhana, which is a state of pure equanimity and mindfulness, free from pleasure and pain.
So it's a journey inward, going deeper and deeper into the mind to find liberation.
Right. Now, it's super important to understand that throughout this whole exposition of the 62 views, the Buddha wasn't endorsing any one of them as the ultimate truth.
So he wasn't saying, here's the right one, believe this.
Nope, not at all. He saw that clinging to any of these views, no matter how sophisticated or convincing, would ultimately lead to suffering.
Because they're all just limited perspectives.
Exactly. He recognized that these beliefs, whether they came from personal experience or intellectual reasoning, were all conditioned.
Conditioned? What do you mean?
They all arose from specific causes and conditions, particularly the interaction between our senses and the world, and the cravings and attachments that come from that.
So it's not about judging these beliefs as right or wrong. It's about seeing how they develop and how clinging to them keeps us trapped in suffering.
Exactly. Now, there's this really important Buddhist concept called dependent co-arising, but it's not laid out in detail in the excerpts of the Brahmajāla Sutta we're looking at today.
Right, but what's the basic idea?
Well, it's the idea that everything arises from a web of causes and conditions. Nothing exists independently. And that includes our beliefs. They're not random. They come from somewhere.
So it's about understanding the causes and conditions that lead to our beliefs and seeing how those beliefs, in turn, shape our experiences.
Precisely. Okay, so to wrap up the sutta, it ends with one of the Buddha's main disciples, Venerable Ananda, asking what this whole discourse should be called. And the Buddha gives it several names: the net of meaning, the net of Dhamma, the Brahma net, the net of views, and maybe the most interesting one, the unexcelled victory in battle.
The unexcelled victory in battle. That's a powerful image.
Right. But the battle here isn't against other people. It's the battle against clinging to fixed views and beliefs.
Ah, so it's about freeing ourselves from the limitations of our own minds.
Exactly.
So to sum up, the Brahmajāla Sutta gives us this amazing panorama of all the different ideas that were circulating during the Buddha's time. It shows his deep understanding of these different viewpoints, not judging them, but analyzing them with incredible insight.
And for someone new to Buddhism, it's important to get this key point. The Buddha's not giving his own answers in this sutta. He's actually pointing beyond any fixed set of answers.
So by exploring all these different perspectives, he's showing us that true understanding lies beyond clinging to any one particular belief system.
Exactly. He's highlighting how all views are impermanent and conditioned, subject to change.
And this is relevant for all of us, not just scholars of Buddhism. We all have our own beliefs.
Of course.
Right.
So the sutta gives us this incredible framework for understanding how our own beliefs arise and how they shape our experience of the world.
And maybe, just maybe, it can help us loosen our grip on those beliefs a little bit and open ourselves up to a deeper understanding of reality. So here's a question for you to ponder.
I like where this is going. What's the question?
How many of these ancient views are still relevant today? Maybe in different forms, but are they still playing out in our modern world? And how might the Buddha's approach of non-attachment, of seeking understanding without clinging to certainty, be helpful for navigating all the conflicting information and ideologies we encounter today? Take a moment to reflect on your own deeply held beliefs. How do you hold them? And how might loosening your grip on them lead to greater freedom and understanding?
Wow, that's a lot to think about.
It is, but it's definitely worth pondering. And that's our deep dive for today.